Welcome to Blue Marble Defender Series number 23, Too Big to Handle. This is part one of a series, Martian Invasion. Chapter 1, Something's Happening on Mars. Blue Marble Defender dinner table conversations were usually a bubbling pot of ideas and calls to action, but an unwelcome tone cooled the atmosphere one evening. Pops, usually upbeat and throwing challenges to Rookie and Leo, was very quiet. After he speared a thin piece of beef and placed it into the fondue chinoise pot's boiling bouillon, he spoke softly and with a note of worry. I've been watching Phobos all day and I'm mystified. I can't see clearly. My view is somehow distorted. It's something I've never experienced. At first, I thought my telescope was the problem, so I went on the internet and I commandeered the big Keck telescope in Hawaii. Same thing. Space between Mars and that little Phobos moon, well, they're distorted somehow. I checked with colleagues in Japan and Chile, and they can't see clearly either. I suppose there could be volcanic activity on Phobos and maybe a gas jetting that disturbs our view, but volcanism seems almost impossible. That moon is so small and its density is so low, I almost consider it porous. When Pops paused, Leo said, if volcanism is unlikely, what else could it be? Well, Pop said, I can imagine an alternative, but it's even more unlikely. Something could be intentionally distorting our view. Perhaps intelligent life on Mars. Beings there could be creating the distortion to hide something. Rookie said, but Pops, I thought no Mars probe or a flyby ever found the slightest sign of life on the surface, not even tiny microbes. And there's no indication its atmosphere could support more complex life. Pops nodded and said, you're right. But if we rule out natural phenomena such as volcanism and rule out the possibility of intelligent life on Mars, we have to imagine even more remote possibilities, such as some other civilization arriving there undetected and hiding something. Here's another detail for you. The distorted area is roughly rectangular. I've seen a few objects appear at what could be its edges and disappear only a minute or two later. If the distortions are caused by volcanic gas, well, I suppose the objects could be fragments, and waves of gas could cause the shift in visibility. But if it's an intentionally created distortion field, and if I'm getting glimpses of pieces of large objects, it's kind of scary. Can any of you come up with a plausible explanation for all this? Mom chuckled. She speared a carrot with her long fork, placed it into the broth, and said, long ago, Earthlings named the red planet Mars after the ancient Roman god of war. When its two moons were discovered in the late 1800s, they were named Phobos for fear and Deimos for dread. That primed people to be scared of them, and science fiction writers have had great fun playing on that. The most public one was an April Fool's hoax in the 1950s. It asserted the two moons were artificial satellites, and one Soviet scientist even claimed that Phobos was a hollow metal shell. Leo smiled and shook his head. He looked up and prepared to make a joke about little green men when Pop's phone rang, and a second later he stepped away from the table. But the others heard him say, "Hey, how you doing?" Yes. Yep, that's consistent with what I've seen too. Yes, you're right. I guess I should. I was going to wait till after dinner, but... Chapter 2, A Job for the United Nations. Pop walked to the breakfast table the next morning looking as though a 10-kilo rabbit had used him for a trampoline all night. Rookie politely said, "Gee, Pops, you look tired. A bad night's sleep?" Pops replied, "Well, Rook, I wish it were that, but I didn't even get to bed. The UN Secretary General asked me to keep a close eye on this Mars situation. I did, and through the night, things went from worrisome to alarming. Early on, probably before you went to bed, I saw many more of those little blips near the edge of that distortion zone, but about 3 a.m., I thought I'd lost my mind. I thought I saw 4 massive spaceships move out and back in. I recorded the images, but I haven't had a chance to check them. Could you take a look and tell me if you see the same things I did? I thought I saw enormous ships shaped like light bulbs, the kind of thing a demented science fiction writer would dream up. Could you go to my lab and check it right now? Unless you tell me I was having a bad dream, Earth may be facing a challenge far greater than we Blue Marble defenders can handle, and I'll need to haul my butt to Geneva and hand off responsibility for it to the UN Security Council." Rookie pulled up the images on Pop's large screen, saw the same thing he had, but waited to tell him until he woke from a much-needed nap. The moment he said it wasn't a dream, Pops phoned the UN Secretary General, packed a suitcase, and drove to the Bordeaux airport. When Pops arrived in Geneva, he received a message saying Security Council members couldn't agree on whether the Mars sightings were worth the trouble of working together. Instead, Pops should immediately give an information briefing to the UN's 193-member ambassadors. His taxi dropped him near the 12-meter-high broken chair, commemorating landmine victims at Geneva's Place des Nations. He jogged down the sidewalk that was lined with national flags, went up the Palais steps, down the main corridor, and into the resplendent council chambers. The Secretary General greeted him, saying, "We're glad you could come, Galileo." And a technician connected his laptop to a giant overhead screen. This was Pop's first time in this 500-seat room. He looked around in awe at his upper walls covered with dramatic Spanish murals from the 1920s, while the Secretary General took the podium. "Delegates," he said, "Dr. Galileo serves us as leader of the Blue Marble Defenders and has protected Earth from extraterrestrial incursions and environmental pollution for the last 3 years. He will now give you his assessment of recent disturbing developments within the solar system." The ambassadors gave Pops a polite applause as he approached the microphone. He introduced his scientific credentials and said, "Yesterday, I observed visual distortions in the space between Mars and its moon Phobos. I concluded, and the world's astronomy community agrees, the distortion is not a natural phenomenon, but was intentionally caused by some unknown actor using an unknown method. At 3 a.m. today Central European Time, I observed spacecraft emerge from under that distortion field and quickly return beneath it. I conclude many spacecraft are obscured there, and some may be enormous. The screen behind me shows what I observed last night. Take a look. Each of those 4 craft is over 3 football pitches in length and 1 pitch in diameter. I believe these ships originated on Mars because Earth's many professional and amateur astronomers would have certainly detected anything that size if it had arrived from elsewhere. I will not speculate about the ship's capabilities and purpose. Unless they threaten Earth, we should take no aggressive action, but we should be prudent. Earth should prepare for the possibility of their being hostile. Dealing with such a force is far beyond the capabilities of the Blue Marble defenders. Our team of 4 part-time people is hardly a match for what could be a massive military power. I recommend the Security Council urgently address this matter." While waiting for them to act, the Blue Marble Defenders have invited astrobiologists from 6 large country space programs to form a group named MARG, M-A-R-G, for the Mars Anomaly Response Group. We will monitor the situation, give your countries daily updates, and disband when the Security Council takes charge. Buzzing, anxious conversations filled the large room when Pops left the podium. He met the 6 Mars representatives he'd phoned. They walked together to a nearby conference room, and they got straight to work, studying the Martian spaceships for clues to their capabilities. When Pops checked in with Mom, Leo, and Rookie using Zoom that night, Leo asked, "Do the rest of us need to do anything, or will we BMDs just sit this one out?" Pops replied, "Hey, good question, Leo. If the Security Council takes over, as they should, we defenders will just watch from the sidelines. But if governments won't collaborate, we defenders may need to step up. But sheesh, that wouldn't be easy. Come on, think about us traveling to Moscow, for example, knocking on the Kremlin's door and saying, 'Hello, we're assigning tasks to your military, to your army.' Ha, they'd shoo us away like unwanted trick-or-treaters on Halloween." The next morning, Pops opened the MARG meeting with, "Today, we'll review your astrobio observations and work together and try to devise some scenarios that could explain how Martians could build spaceships without our even knowing that Martians existed. But first, let's go around the room and hear how your governments view the situation. Let's start with Russia. Vladimir?" "Gally, my government agrees that I can share some of our astrobio knowledge with you and the group, but it wants everyone to know the UN can't limit the Russian government's actions. The Russian military will not reveal any secret capabilities and will continue to protect its people as they see fit." Pop said, "Well, that's a familiar stance." The Chinese representative, Xunhua, said, "My government's position is the same. We emphasize we have the will and the capability to protect the Chinese people, and we refuse to be forced to work with any other country or UN group." Pops just nodded. The American representative Ronnie said, "For once, we are directly in agreement with our Russian and Chinese colleagues. We will protect our military secrets and use our power when we choose, and we'll ask permission from no one." Pop smiled and commented ironically, So it'll be business as usual in international affairs. No one sees the value of unity, even though an external threat may face us all." Chapter 3, Shock. The following morning, even before the MARG members had taken their seats, Pops closed the conference room door and said, "Here's the deal, everyone. The Martians just showed themselves. 16 spaceships appeared between Phobos and Mars. 5 of them are headed our way. One is a modest size. It looks kind of like a flying saucer, the kind of thing people described 50 or 60 years ago. You know, the ones the U.S. Air Force called UFOs, for unidentified flying objects. Another is a larger, sleeker cruiser. Margita, our European Union representative, has studied its design and believes it is highly maneuverable and likely to be armed. The EU further believes the 3 colossal bulbous ships accompanying them are designed to transport massive numbers of warriors or perhaps war-making supplies. The only thing we know for certain is that all 5 are racing toward us at tremendous speed. It appears they may cover the 65 million kilometer distance in only 3 days. Yeah, yeah, right. You heard right. 3 days to cover a distance that would take any ship from Earth fully 6 to 9 months. Their ability to attain such speed may well indicate other technological advances that will surprise us. Now, if the behavior of the beings behind this armada is anything like the behavior of human beings, the 5 ships may represent an advance party coming to introduce themselves, explain their intentions, and defend themselves if necessary. But of course, that's merely conjectured at this time. Do any of you have assessments from your national agencies, perhaps, that you can share with the rest of Marg? Chunhua's expression was grave. She stood and said, "The Chinese government is on red alert. We've seen what novel weapons, say like the atomic bomb, have done to unsuspecting populations, and we have no intention of allowing ourselves to be the victims of a surprise attack." The Russian and American representatives sat with folded arms in nodded agreement, while the Japanese, European, and Indian representatives gave each other worried looks. The Japanese representative, a smiling man named Hiroki, said, "We of course abhor surprise attacks, but believe it is always best to listen to others. My government advises that we be alert and take no actions at this time. That said, we are shocked, profoundly shocked, to see ships speeding toward us without communication arriving from them in advance." Everyone around the table nodded their agreement, and the Indian representative, Bahram, said, "The silence of these intruders has our military on edge and trigger happy, but our government is resolved to act only in unison with the UN. But of course, the Security Council has yet to signal it is willing to pull all countries together on this." Chapter 4, First Contact. 2 mornings later, the Marg scientists were sipping coffee and tea when Pops rushed in, saying, "You probably heard the 5 ships are holding at 10 million kilometers out." Everyone rose to their feet and looked expectantly at Pops. "And, minutes ago, we received a somewhat garbled message. It's now being examined, and we'll receive a transcript shortly." Fortunately, they tried to put their thoughts into English, and even though the grammar is shaky, it's better than us trying to puzzle out their language. The scientists were making nervous jokes about the high drama they were witnessing when a firm knock on the door brought grim looks onto their faces. A messenger burst in and handed Pops a folder. He scanned it, removed 7 pages of text, 7 pages with an image on it, and 7 thumb drives. While distributing them, he said, "You'll see the message makes rambling references to atmosphere, soil, and water. But its core message, folks, is the question, will you help our planet live again?" The picture showed a frontal view of a being shaped somewhat like an acorn with its cap on the ground and its nut facing up. The being's top section was a rusty red pointed dome. A white band containing 4 round green eyes sat beneath it. 2 eyes faced forward and 1 faced each side. From the eye band down to the base, the being was a darker rusty red and apparently solid, except for a vertical slit just below the band of the eye band. Its skin did not appear to be rigid, but there was no clue to its composition or firmness. Pop saw 2 sets of 3 extremities at its base. The first, visible on the left, was a thick and round, like a metal pipe with an articulating joint. It terminated on a pad surrounded by 6 protrusions that Pops thought must be used for locomotion, like for a human being, like a leg. Next was a thin tube coiled and raised to its body with a cup attached to its end. It appeared able to be extended down or out. At first sight, Pops had no idea what it might be used for. Next came a shorter, thinner, articulating tube that terminated in a small pad. Protruding from it were 8 hinged, articulating small tubes that ended in points. Pops figured it to be the rough equivalent of an arm. Since the photo's frontal view showed 2 legs, cup tubes, and 2 arms, Pops figured it must have had like 4 of each in its total body, making it both a stable being and a resilient being. Pops said, I want each of you to transmit this information to your defense and intelligence departments ASAP. Ask them for their interpretations and please tell them that I recommend their government make all their scientific and military capabilities available to the Security Council and soon. On her way out the door, Margita commented to nobody in particular, if one ship were alone, we would quickly offer help, but 5 ships at Earth's doorstep and 11 visible back near Mars? Well, their inquiry isn't from an innocent or some innocent creature in need, that's for sure. Pops phoned the UN Secretary General and said, I'm outraged that the Security Council hasn't taken charge. Who will answer the Martians' message? Earth needs a united position and a single point of contact and military readiness. The Secretary General replied, Golly, I've tried, and I'll try again to set up an emergency meeting, but it can't possibly happen before tomorrow. When group members came back, Pop said, the most important function our planet could take right now, most important action would be to marshal its military strength. But hey, we know that's not our job, so let's just do all we can. Let's try to understand our potential adversary from the image we received. I'll start. I imagine it's evolved to its current form by adapting to environmental factors. By the way, rather than refer to the being as it, I'll call it he, just kind of to humanize it, he said with a smile. He continued, it's the evolutionary forces that will affect it, just like they do on Earth. Mars's thinning atmosphere, its loss of oxygen, and resulting 95% CO2 atmosphere, those were the most important factors. No food can grow now on their surface, so hey, survival must have required absorbing sustenance from minerals. Now, after thinking about it, I believe the suction cups may well serve that purpose. Now, I believe that moving long distances must not have been important to survival on Mars, but looking at those fingers, manual dexterity was important. First for turning rocks over, maybe to access minerals, and later for important stuff like manipulating tools and designing circuits for the advanced technologies they've got. The speed of their ships is staggering, and it hints that we'll see more unexpected capabilities, perhaps something that's hidden in the slit below its eye band. As for the Martians' coloring, its varying reds are probably due to the presence of hematite, the mineral that gives the planet its red color. The being's green parts are probably due to olivine. That's a green mineral. These colors support the idea that the being's nutrients are mainly mineral and not organic. Since they retreated underground when their atmosphere turned to CO2, my guess is that they were able to trap or generate oxygen there. Now, Pop stopped speaking and he looked to the others for comment. Hiroki, the bespectacled Japanese representative, said, I concur with your quick analysis and would add that the small vertical slit between the eye and down to the arms is not likely for eating or breathing, but may be an organ for vocal communication. The full room nodded at this initial assessment and fell silent. Silver-haired Bahram, the Indian representative, said, I combine this being's appearance and its message to conclude the civilization prospered underground and now wants to reestablish itself on the surface. And they like the environment they see here. We're their nearest planet. Nods of agreement were followed by a long silence, and Pop said, "Hey, let's take a half-hour break." When they returned, Pops carried around a pot of coffee in one hand and a pot of tea in the other. He filled everyone's cup and asked how their countries were reacting to the Martians' message. Xunhua, the Chinese representative, said, "My government is wary of their intentions. Mars would need massive amounts of water, oxygen, and soil to bring life to their barren planet. Unless they have a tiny population, which appears unlikely given the technology they've created, they would want far more from Earth than China or other countries should be willing to give. We believe these Martians should be feared, not accommodated." Well, the other scientists nodded, indicating their governments held similar positions. Pop said to himself, "Dang, getting the world to agree on a course of action will be almost impossible. The attitude that we always take care of ourselves first won't make it easy to develop a good relationship with Martians who are wanting help." He dismissed the group for the day, emailed his nightly briefing to the 193 UN member countries, and returned to his UN office where he peered into the telescope he kept trained on the 5 Martian spacecraft. But they were gone. He said to himself, "Oh, they're on the move." He redirected the telescope and found them fast approaching Earth. He thought, "We haven't answered their message. We aren't ready to deal with them." Chapter 5. The Dragon Roars Fire. When the group reconvened the next morning, Pops confirmed what they had observed or heard overnight. The 5 Martian ships were now positioned only 1 million kilometers away. He then moved the discussion to why the Martians had sent 5 ships ahead of their other 11. He also asked for ideas on why they had chosen 3 enormous ones, 1 cruiser, or perhaps it was a fighter, and a small saucer. The group had no facts and could only make conjectures, so Pops kept it short and asked them to speculate on the type of propulsion system that the Martians employed. That discussion sounded more like sci-fi enthusiasts sitting around a campfire than a group of scientists at the UN. "Lamentable, isn't it?" Pops concluded. "They've been visible to us for days now, and we still have no idea what's going on." Pops then asked for updates from their governments. Again, it was Xinhua who spoke first. "As many of you know, my country is in eager anticipation of the Chinese New Year. This year will be the year of the dragon, number 5 in the cycle of the Chinese zodiac. It is an auspicious time for us since the dragon is both noble and the mightiest of signs. The dragon may be mysterious and imaginative, but it also asserts ambition and dominance. It tells us we must live by our own rules if we are to be successful. I was specifically asked by our government to remind you that the year of the dragon is upon us." Then Xinhua shrugged and she added, "I cannot say more than that. Their message is assertive, but it is also ambiguous." Pops nodded and had just asked Hiroki if he had any messages from his government when a messenger burst in without knocking, and he walked over to Pops and whispered in his ear. Pops looked around the table and said, "Hey, in the time we've been talking, the 5 advanced ships have covered 9 million kilometers and are now paused a mere 1,000 kilometers from Earth. Light travels at 300,000 kilometers per second, so that little bit of traveling was no great feat from a cosmic point of view, but for we poor mortal Earthlings, their speed is astounding. Then another messenger burst in. Pop stepped quickly toward the door to meet him, and after a few seconds, the color drained from his face. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply again. Turning to the group, he said, "The Chinese military unleashed a barrage of high-intensity lasers at the 5 Martian ships. The Martians then advanced to within 100 kilometers of Earth, and the Chinese fired 3 more barrages. There was no sign of damages to the ship in less than a minute. One of the fast ships moved away and positioned itself in a geostationary orbit above the island of Hong Kong." The 6-member reps jumped from their chairs, and Xunhua gasped. Pop spoke sternly to the messenger. "Instruct our technical support team to move themselves and all their gear into this room immediately. We don't have time for you to be running back and forth with messages." The communications team arrived first and plugged into the internet and their antenna through a dedicated communication channel on the west wall of the room. The telescopic observation team arrived shortly after and frantically set themselves up along the room's north wall. Pops had transformed the room from a quiet setting for deliberations into a war room ready for action. "Set up the displays above each of your teams. We need to see them clearly. Show translations of any incoming messages in red and any we send back in green. And bring in a TV tuned to international news." The 2 teams hesitated, not knowing where to find a spare TV. But when Pops banged the table, shouted, "Now!" they jumped and the 2 technicians ran out of the room. Tension showed on every face. Bahram, the Indian representative, made a sick joke that this could be his last day on Earth, and he regretted having to spend it with other nerds. Still, no communication came from the Martian to explain their actions. It was mind-numbing. Pops left the room to make a call. "Mr. Secretary General, you must at least acknowledge receiving the Martian message and ask about their intentions." The diplomat demurred, but Pops insisted. "Sir, the fate of the world's people may depend on Earth showing a willingness to hold a dialogue. Please take the initiative or delegate it to me. Now, sir, I implore you." When Pops returned to the room, Margita pointed to the newly installed TV showing one of the gigantic spaceships hovering over the island of Hong Kong. A colossal waterspout rushed up into it from Victoria Harbor, one of the deepest harbors in the world. Water was being sucked up faster than it could flow back in from the ocean. When ships and fishing boats sat on the bottom of the naked harbor, the water rushing up into the spaceship turned brown and it dwindled away. The bulbous spaceship then moved to the east side of the island and continued around. Huge walls of water furiously rushed into the void in Victoria Harbor. From both sides, boats were swamped. Some were tossed into the air. Small buildings were washed away. All eyes in the room were glued to the TV. All hands were glued to the table. Their knuckles were white. The spaceship sucked the water from Aberdeen Harbor, Repulse Bay, Taitamwan Harbor, Junk Harbor, and silently rose from the camera's view as if it had never been there. Enormous tidal waves could be seen converging on the island. Water was shown rushing through the streets, toppling smaller buildings and making islands of skyscrapers. The destruction was overwhelming to those who saw it on TV and must have been incomprehensible to anyone who lived on the island and survived it. The Secretary General was one of millions who watched it in horror. He urgently requested that the Security Council meet, but its members did not respond. The Chinese and all Earthlings had been humiliated. Every human, from the most exalted to the humblest, now viewed the Martian ships with deathly fear. Every conversation, everywhere included them, their power, and the question of why people on Earth would attack them rather than talk with them about what they wanted. Chapter 6. The Bear Takes to the Air. Pops ordered that nearby meeting rooms be turned into bunk rooms and told MARG members they were on call 24/7. He added that he would provide a buffet for them at the conference room at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 7 p.m. Frazzled and despondent, each MARG member retreated to her or his room as soon as they were fitted out. Pops monitored the telescopes for a time, noted the ship that had sucked out the water around Hong Kong was now en route back to Mars, and a similar one was about to take its place with the 4 that had been left behind a mere 100 kilometers from the Earth. Pops was exhausted, but he forced himself to stay awake until he sent his status report to the 193 country leaders. All was calm overnight, and the convenient and delicious breakfast buffet was served the next morning. Well, it helped the group out of the previous day's funk. Pops turned the discussion to persuading governments to coordinate a response to the Martians, but as he started to say how they should work, Vladimir interrupted. No, no, no! One country may not trust another to defend our interests. Time and again, we Russians listened to the nice words of other countries, but later found beneath their smiles they served only themselves. And harm came to Russia. No, 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 Russia will never agree. Others would steal our ideas and our technology and corrupt our people. Vladimir's outburst froze everyone, and the room fell silent until the astronomer monitoring the telescope stood, and he said, May I have your attention? I believe 5 missiles have been fired from Siberia toward the Martians. They'll arrive shortly. Everyone stood with eyes locked on the monitor. They're moving fast, and we're having trouble keeping them in the center of the screen. The technician said, See those smudges on the corner? That's them, the astronomer said. Each person could hear their own breath and heartbeat. The screen turned bright white, its edges darkened, but again filled with white. That repeated 3 more times within 10 seconds. The astronomer said, I believe those were 5 separate explosions. The screen returned to the darker hue of space, and it showed specks and odd shapes floating and changing, but within a pattern. It was like an image one would see in a kaleidoscope. Still silent, everyone watched the pattern evolve. After a minute, the image cleared and the spaceships again came into view. Pops told the astronomer, I see only 4 of the ships. Can you broaden the field of vision? The scope zoomed out, but still only 4 images were visible. One of the bulbous ships was missing. Ha! Vladimir shouted. Ho, 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 ho! At least we got one of them, and I'm certain the other 4 are neutralized. He danced a 10-second version of the Hopak, a Russian squat dance. He rose with a huge smile on his face, took a bow, and bounded toward the monitor for a better view of the 4 remaining ships. They seemed to simply hang in space. Their appearance was unchanged. They were unmoving, unblemished, and still silver in color. After a few minutes, Pop said, Well, okay, let's sit down. But before he could finish, the communications technician jumped from his chair and faced the group. Something's happening in Siberia. I just heard an emergency weather notice of a colossal storm. It might be related to the Martians, you think? Pops answered, Tune that TV to RT, the Russian news service, and bring another technician in to scour the internet for news or videos. A young woman dashed in the door less than a minute later, plugged her laptop into an Ethernet port, and started typing. While most of the group simply watched, Ronnie, the NASA representative, wandered to the corner of the room and poured himself a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, the new technician pointed to the TV and a video soon came on the screen. Sounds of wind and voices crackled through the speaker, and through dust and leaves roiling in the foreground, a funnel cloud became visible in the distance. Ronnie dashed out of the room, but the others sat transfixed. The funnel cloud moved closer to the camera and grew darker. Then the funnel cloud collapsed and all was silent. A moment later, wind noise grew and the camera shook. The noise became a roar, and the video abruptly ended. Margita said, "Now that's how I imagine a tornado would act. You know, tornadoes like the ones that happen on America's Great Plains." Nobody reacted, and she continued, "Reminds me of Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz movie." The only response from the group was a tight-lipped nod from Bahram. The TV screen changed to an anchor at RT's news desk who was speaking Russian. English subtitles appeared on the bottom of the screen saying, "The city of Novosibirsk reports being hit by an extreme low-pressure event. Strong winds are just now subsiding and powerful thunderstorms have commenced." Ronnie walked back in and interrupted. Hey, our satellites show that one of those bulbous ships positioned itself over Siberia and disrupted the weather system for hundreds of miles around it. Barometric pressure readings indicate it sucked out a huge volume of air, must have compressed it. Staring scornfully at Vladimir, Ronnie said, "So much for your Russian military blowing them away, and so much for your stupid dance." "Fake news! Fake news!" Vladimir shouted angrily as he waved a pointed finger toward the NASA representative. "Fake news my butt," Ronnie replied. "Look through that telescope and you'll see a fat ship on its way back to Mars with our air." Pop stood, held his arms out, and said, "Calm down, everybody. We're here to assess the situation, and if our little team can't work together, how can we expect our governments to?" The telescope's image continued to show 4 ships sitting immobile 100 kilometers out until Pops asked the astronomer to train it toward Mars. The room let out a collective gasp when it showed 2 sleek cruisers and 8 massive, bulbous spaceships heading toward Earth and passing that ship full of compressed air on its way back to Mars. Chapter 7, Cowboy Shootout. The lunch buffet was wheeled in, and even though their appetites were diminished, everyone took a plate and ate. There was no conversation. Tension filled the air until Pops broke it by asking the entire room, "So, what do we recommend to UN member countries? We've plainly seen that our weapons don't work against them. They've wreaked havoc on our planet in response to our attempts to destroy them. So what options do we have, folks?" Hiroki raised a finger and said, "The Japanese ambassador to the UN and I have discussed this very question and—" Ronnie interrupted him with, "Excuse me, Hiroki, but it's approaching 2 p.m. I believe the U.S. Air Force has a treat for you, and I wouldn't want us to miss it. I wouldn't want to miss a moment of it. Can we have the TV tuned to CNN, please? Please, up there, change it. Change the channel. I believe they're ready to show you America's surprise solution." The TV lit up on an English-speaking, serious-faced newscaster. Ronnie said, "Since it'll be announced shortly, and in the name of the openness and cooperative spirit that our friend Gally here is always counseling us, I'll explain what you're about to witness. Shortly, an SR-71 spy plane will launch from Vandenberg Airfield in California and fly to about 90,000 feet. It'll shake for a moment or two, and then just return to its base. Then, when our friendly astronomer over by the wall trains his telescope on those Martian ships 100 kilometers out, we'll see them sitting there and they'll look just the same as now. But, and it's a big but. No, he laughed. Not like the fake news that you hear from Vladimir's but. The big but is the ships will still be there, but we won't hear anything from them ever again. Why, you may ask? Did the Martians just change their minds about attacking us? Well, no. We won't hear from them again because their brains will have been rattled into something like caramel corn sold at the fairgrounds. You, my friends, will now see what American military power really can do. You'll see our newest weapon in action. You'll witness the first use of our sonic laser. We call it Sunny for short. In a few words, Sunny bombards its target with sound. No, not something like Beatles music or anything like that, but wait, that's not possible, you may say. Sound can't exist in the vacuum of space. But if you think that, you, my friend, are out of date. Acoustic phonons, the rough equivalent of light photons, will be tunneled through the vacuum of space through piezoelectricity coupling. You never hear it because it's above the audible range of humans. However, on entering those ships, it'll scramble everything inside. Nothing in it will ever be able to function again. No instruments, no weapons, no living beings. It will be case closed. Martian case closed. If the rest of the fleet decides to ignore what's happening and continue their attack, it's no problem for the good old U.S. Air Force. Whoops, excuse me. We now have a U.S. Space Force. We can send out those acoustic phonons all day and all night. The only problem we'll have is cleaning up all the space junk the Martians leave behind. Ronnie pointed to the TV screen. Hey, that's cool. CNN's camera is following the SR-71 better than I expected. I'm afraid that's all the drama you'll see. The problem will be solved quickly and quietly. No muss, no fuss. So, my dear Galileo, do we just disband now? Can we at least hold a celebratory party or something? Maybe go down to that beach on Lake Geneva and bring a small band in to entertain us? Pop said, you lay out an attractive scenario, but let's hold off celebrating just for a bit, okay? Ronnie said, fine by me. I'm going to hit the head and then draft new Facebook posts. Would you mind my posting a photo or two of this solemn and totally unnecessary group? When Ronnie returned from the restroom, CNN was still on the TV, but it was broadcasting from a local affiliated station in Iowa. He called out to the room, "What's up?" Brahm replied, "It appears some huge swath of farmland is being sucked up into one of those bulbous spacecraft. Trees too. A farmhouse? Did anyone count how many farms are gone? We saw the ultimate vacuum cleaner near Hong Kong, and now we're seeing the ultimate dirt compactor." But, Ronnie said, that can't be. Is it one of their other newly arrived ships doing this? One we didn't fire at? Vladimir stood up in front of his chair and said, "Oh, my dear Ronnie, no, tut. Look there. The telescope is showing 4 ships still in place, but one dropped from their formation a couple of minutes ago while you were dropping your trousers in the men's room. It's decimating America's breadbasket, Iowa's corn belt. Maybe it still has an appetite for Nebraska's wheat fields. Oh, excuse me, Ronnie," he said sarcastically, almost spitting. "I'm speaking too much. I'm sure you would like to tell us more about the wonderful U.S. Air Force. Or is it Space Force? All the things it can achieve and all by itself, too. Ha ha! Pops hadn't thought the group's morale could drop beneath its level at lunchtime, but it had. The only thing keeping Marg members from complete desperation was their satisfaction of seeing an American braggart laid low. Pop said, "We've now seen the world's 3 largest militaries act on their own and only succeed in making our situation worse. This group, we, the Mark, we need to fill the void. Let's recommend how the world should respond." Each of the 6 other Mark members looked down at the table or down at the floor. Some shrugged their shoulders. Some looked at the ceiling. Pop said, "Your body language clearly says you don't agree with my idea. Hey, look, I'm accustomed to taking risks to save others. This is the most critical moment Earth has ever faced, and it demands action. If the Security Council won't act, someone has to. If it's not the Marg here, it'll have to be the Blue Marble Defenders. Nobody ever imagined we'd face a challenge of this scale, but we've put our lives on the line before to protect Earth, and we'll do it now. One question for you all. Will you 6 report us by carrying out the task of communicating progress to the world while we defenders take action?" 6 heads shook slowly, and someone said in a small voice, "Are you kidding? This is an impossible situation. Why would I involve myself?" This story will be continued.